Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 235 of the podcast for December 7th, 2015. Today's episode is unique in that it was recorded and streamed live online last week. My guest is Sam MacPherson. We're talking about lean leadership, his background in the U.S. military and special forces, going back and forth between the military and manufacturing, and really, really interesting background and perspective that Sam has. So I hope you enjoy listening to the episode. If you'd like to watch it as a video, you can actually go to leanblog.org/235. There's a YouTube video embedded in the page if you'd rather watch than listen, but either way, I hope you enjoy the conversation. My guest today on the video feed is Sam MacPherson. He is, for those of you who are looking, you can see he is an Alabama fan. He is the co-founder of the Lean Leadership Academy. He is the founder of the Summit on Lean Leadership, which is a partnership with the good folks at Lean Frontiers. And I'm really excited about the conversation. Sam, instead of me reading your bio, why don't you tell the viewers, the listeners, about your career? It's such an interesting story that you have.
Yeah, I guess you could say I'm more of the accidental lean expert. It really kind of goes back. My first job, my first introduction to even Japanese management goes all the way back to the late 1970s, where I actually worked while I was, after I got out of high school. My first job out of high school before I joined the Army was with a company called Fujikon, which made automotive speakers for the automotive industry. And that was my first introduction to anything what was known back then as Japanese management method. And I was introduced to 5S and a lot of things we know commonly today. They certainly didn't call it lean. And was introduced to quality circle activities and got to lead. It was trained in quality circles and lean and lead some quality circle activities. Of course, they eventually moved the plant, and that kind of left me with where do I go from here, and joined the Army. And over time, got my commission. I was first enlisted, so I started as a private E1, nothing, no stripes or anything. I grew up through the ranks, became a staff sergeant, and got the opportunity to work as as an infantryman for an operations brigade operations officer, and he recommended me for OCS. So I went to officer candidate school, got my commission as a second lieutenant, and shortly after that, I got an opportunity to work with Dr. Shigeo Shingo during the fielding of the Bradley fighting vehicle. We're trying to do modular maintenance and battlefield recovery. So FMC and General Dynamics had brought him in.
Oh, wow.
Of course, at the time, I didn't know who he was. you never do. But
some people listening might not know who he is. Look up Shigeo Shingo if you don't know. He's a legend. And
I got an opportunity later on. Of course, I went into Special Forces after that, jumping in and out of Bradley fighting vehicles. And when you want to blow things up and shoot things, is less fun. I didn't realize the career changing opportunity that was for me, but I got an opportunity to really kind of learn from me some unique things that stuck with me over the years. But then I went on into Special Forces, and for those of you that don't know, the U.S. Army Special Forces is nicknamed the Green Berets. So we're kind of similar to the Girl Scouts because we both wear one. But during the 80s, it wasn't such a great time for special operations at that time, and decided to get back into manufacturing for a while, and essentially got to work with got to intern at Toyota for 2 years at Georgetown, and then out of that helped with the setup of the Mercedes-Benz plant in Vance, Alabama as part of my Alabama stuff, and then went to work with Crown Cork and Seal, became operations manager, a plant manager, director of manufacturing technology, and then the war happened. And then I got called back to my old job.
This is 2001, right after 9/11.
Right, immediately after 9/11, was one of the first guys to go in to Karshikanabad, Uzbekistan, then Afghanistan as part of Task Force Dagger. So if you remember the guys that were riding horseback up the Bok Valley and all that kind of stuff, and guys that wore hats like this back then, I was one of those guys. So my job was I was the chief of special operations plans. So I basically did the war planning and sent the A teams out to do their missions in Afghanistan. And retired in 2004, got back into consulting through the University of North Carolina and helping them with their College of Engineering, and then decided, just to dedicate, the rest of my life to leadership development and more effective lean transformations. So that's what I do today with the Lean Leadership Academy. It's something that Art Smalley and I got started back in 2011, 2012, and it's been a great experience. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's quite a nutshell. And, thank you for all of your service to the country. And it's really interesting to me to hear about your steps back and forth. I've heard, I've met people who they were in the military, then they've gotten into industry or into healthcare, and they've gotten exposed to lean. It seemed like, you were in industry, then the military, then back to industry, then back to the military, back to the industry. And to have lean be a part of that, in even those early days, you mentioned your first steps in industry, right?
Yeah, and even now, I haven't quite let go. I'm work with as an advisor to the Special Forces Officer Program because I live not too far from the training base that the Special Forces uses here in Pinehurst, North Carolina. And so I'm out there pretty regularly advising them on leadership development with the Special Forces Officer course as part of the Special Warfare Center here out at Camp McCall. Mm-hmm. So I'm still riding both of those rails, 1 foot on each. It seems like I can't get out of either industry, but it kind of keeps me young and it feels like I'm contributing, both ways. So
yeah. Well, let's talk more about the idea or maybe misperceptions that people have. I personally have no background in the military. I've learned a lot. I worked, for example, with a hospital lab director who was retired out of military medicine and then was in the civilian space. And he taught me a lot about, I think, the misperceptions or the stereotypes that people have about quote unquote command and control leadership in the military. You think really hierarchical, dictatorial, do as I say. And, and in a workplace, people, I think, rightfully are realizing that's not the right way to ensure quality and to get things done and to engage people. So maybe, to build on what I learned from, that one lab director, what are some of the misperceptions that us civilian folk have about, how it is in the military with that, supposed command and control type approach?
Well, so to talk about command and control just right up front, just to define what that is from a military perspective, it is not Frederick Taylor, Taylorism type approach to separating the thinking group, the management group, the professional group from the production hands, the workers. And I think, Frederick Taylor did a lot to advance that progressive thinking around, what is command and control and what is the role of management versus what is the role of labor. And so the ghost of Taylorism from that perspective, and I'm not completely opposed to everything that Frederick Taylor did. I think he did some great things. I think some of the things, his legacy has left both good things and things will continue.
But like you said, the part of the bad is that separation between thinking and doing. Lean thinkers would realize everybody's thinking.
And so there are people that came up post the 20s and the turn of the 20th century that went on to actually lead both in industry, in the military industrial complex, and in the military, that were influenced with Taylor's thinking. And so it did creep into both government and the military at points. But the actual definition of how we look at command and control really has to do with who is going to provide unity of command? Who will be the decision maker? Who do we go to? This is really TWI stuff. Who do we go to for help and direction? The other thing about command and control, the control part of it really refers to support and fire direction. So when military talks about control, we're talking about control of weapon systems. So when you're getting support, who gets the support? Who is the primary to get support with fire support? How will we control that support? How will we turn it on? How do we turn it off? And this used to be part of my job as the special operations, plans guy, was to decide, if we're going to have the Air Force light up an area for a certain extent for a while before we have guys on horseback and some people on bare feet run up through a valley where bad guys are, to kind of soften the targets a little bit and kind of open the door for them. I have to open up, certain fireboxes and turn them off. So who controls that? How will we control it? So when we're talking about control, we're really talking about fire support and artillery support, and how we're going to do that and how it will be used. When we talk about command on the other side, we really have to, when you have guys under stress and under duress and in the fog of war, so to speak, you need to know who's in charge. And if for some reason that the person that makes the decision of life and death, or who is going to make decisions about movement and maneuver, you need to know, in the event that part of that chain of command is disabled, you need to know who's next in the chain of command to take that responsibility. So from command, that really is, who do I go to for leadership? Who do I go to for direction? And who do I go to for support? And if any part of that chain of command is disabled, I know who's next in that chain of command that I now latch onto for my direction, because deconflicting combat operations, communication is critical. And the other part of that command part is the communications. How will we communicate? Who will we communicate through? And so command and control really kind of extends to communications as well. So when we talk about command and control, it's really about fires. It's about unity of command. It's about communications. And if you understand that part, maybe that opens up the doors a lot, because it isn't so much do as I say, not as I do, kind of, us and them kind of mentality. And I will say this, because having been a private, in the military, when you are first introduced as part of the American military, you're told if there are two of you, at one person senior, one person will take charge and will take the initiative. So we're really, in the U.S. Army at least, we're taught to take the initiative, take command, and lead from your first 8 weeks in the Army. And that stays with you throughout your career. Now, later on, as we advance your career, you're better prepared for it, because you get career-long training on how to be a leader, and how to make decisions, and how to basically problem solve. Does any of that sound familiar?
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that command and control, it's more about structure and support than it is micromanaging.
Absolutely. Now, I'm not going to say that if there have not been military leaders that have not been micromanagers. Clearly there have, but it's almost near impossible to tightly command and control, from the traditional thinking standpoint, complex operations, especially in special operations, over vast terrain, and when we talk about terrain, we're also talking about networks. We're also talking about people, so how difficult would it be to control interactions, especially say in Afghanistan or Iraq, with populations where you have to have intimate knowledge of the area. It just becomes impossible to be able to do that.
Yeah. Well, and so can you one thing that's been really interesting to me as people have taught me about this is the idea of commander's intent, which I think, can you talk about that in terms of setting the direction, having a goal, but not micromanaging or taking away decision-making within that context?
Yeah, and this is true. This is part of something that's called the military decision-making process, or MDMP. And so within the military, we have our own problem-solving structure, and we have our own planning structure. And so the military decision-making process is really a form of both problem-solving and team collaboration, deconfliction, and leadership and project planning. So the military decision-making process requires the commander, as the senior leader and providing unity of command, to do his specific role in that planning process. Primarily is to provide planning guidance and priorities regarding resources and efforts, which I wish more of our civilian counterparts would do that up front.
Right.
So the commander has to do, first and foremost, is define and analyze the mission, which we basically say you need to boil that down into what we call the 5 W's. Who will do the mission? What is the mission? When is the mission to be done? Where is the mission to be done? And why are we doing that? And part of the extension of that why that the commander provides is his intent, which is what is his vision or end state that he wishes to accomplish as a result of the mission. And the reason why that's important is if the unit understands the intent, even if we can't accomplish the mission as stated or restated, if we understand the intent, we may be able to accomplish the intent, which is the desired end state. Today, more than ever, that commander's intent becomes probably the most critical element of the MDMB process, because it is a very complex, fluid, three-dimensional, environment that we're operating in, more asymmetrical than traditional warfare. That if you really have to understand the intent, so that then you can see all the resources, all the opportunities, all the collaborative efforts and platforms we can use to accomplish that intent. Yeah. A lot of smart guys working together to try to accomplish that end state.
Mm-hmm. So tell me, how do you make direct connections or parallels or help translate, the Green Beret way to the Toyota way in terms of similarities, or how lessons from the Green Beret way would be applicable into a lean environment? And
if I could talk for a minute, Mark, about probably the differences between general purpose forces, which we call the conventional military, and special forces, and why this would be different and more applicable.
Okay, great.
So there is a level of in the military, in all the services, most of your population, most of the population of the military are going to come in as unskilled workers to a certain extent, and we have to professionalize them. So the general purpose force approach is not only to train someone who's never been a soldier or a sailor or a Marine in that profession, but to a certain extent, because of the skill level and because of the complexity and the nature of the operations, there is probably a little bit more directive leadership for the bulk of the population. Mm-hmm. So since most of your population is going to be enlisted junior ranks, just a traditional pyramid type organization, then you're going to need more leaders that exercise more directive style leadership, but still supportive and mentoring to style leadership. Mm-hmm. And because you have that youth and that inexperience, just like you would do at the end of an assembly line, in final assembly at Toyota, you're going to have more strict standards. You're going to have, more leadership, more direction. Whereas it's in special forces, we do recruit a small population straight off the street as part of our 18 Zulu program, or 18 X-ray program, excuse me. But we usually recruit them because they're bringing something special to the special forces. But other than that, probably 90% of our force is recruited out of the military. So they're already experienced commanders. They've already been through leadership training. They're experienced soldiers, completely different population. And the folks that we're going to pull into special operations, because of special forces is more collaborative by nature, the intelligence level is a lot different as well. I mean, the average IQ of an officer in special forces is right around 122, but can run up to 130, 140. And so the team members on a special forces A team or operational detachment alpha is not too far off of that. It'll run from a 112 up to 118 for some of our medical and communications enlisted guys. So here you've got a team that's different than the rest of the Army, because our mission is to build rapport. Is as much military, as much State Department mission as it is military. And so because you have to build relationships and networks, and you have to understand the culture. We also, everybody on the Special Forces A team speaks at least one language, that's additional language, because we speak the language of the the population we work with. We're culturally very sensitive and very, very well educated to cultural norms and taboos and so forth. So it takes a different type of soldier to be in the Green Berets versus a complete direct action mission, special operation mission, where maybe there's not a lot of conversation that goes on. And in special forces too, a big part of our mission is training either unconventional warriors like we did in Afghanistan, or foreign internal defense. Host nations, like for example, we'll train special operators in Iraq, or we'll train them in Turkey, or we'll train them in Italy, or like I've done, or in South America. So a big part of our professional development is the ability to teach, train, and make presentations. It sounds like TWI, doesn't it? And the other thing that's really different is special forces is we call them detachments, because we are literally able, you could take a special forces corporate unit called a group and break it apart into smaller units and send it off to do its own unique mission that's unique from other types of military units. And in doing so, we're trained in a very high level of problem solving, mission planning, project planning, our own version of MDMP, and we relate differently. We are literally a special forces, or the Green Berets is literally an organization built out of teams, small teams that operate the 12-man A team, but that 12-man A team can split into 2 6-man teams, or buddy teams, or 3-man surveillance teams. So we literally operate as teams all the way up to the corporate unit. And so the similarities between special forces and Toyota is the investment, career-long investment in small team leadership all the way up to the general level. We continue special operations training throughout our career. We operate in teams. We have our own version of Toyota business practice, our own problem-solving methodology that we use. We have our own project planning, which we use for mission planning. Even the military mission decision-making process, or MDMP process, we have a version of that for special operation that is more collaborative in nature. So because we have such experience and such intellectual heft on a Green Beret team, we approach it differently, and it tends to be team mission planning. I may be the team commander, but my whole team will get a piece of that mission, and we'll plan it together. We all have roles that we'll play during that mission planning process.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about teams. I've read about the first 6 chapters of the book Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal.
Right.
Really enjoyed, at least I need to read the rest of the book over the holidays here, but there are lots and lots of parallels to lean leadership in his discussion of that. And that phrase seems very specific, team of teams, right?
Yeah, when you kind of get into some of the later chapters, you'll probably see more of the collaborative, what we call fusion cell type approach, where you're bringing in, everyone from every different branch or service or government agency and collaboratively working together to see trends and patterns. Because even though there are algorithms that can help you with that, it's still that human intelligence, and teams looking together at a common problem and seeing different perspectives of that. And so as you get a little bit later into the book Team of Teams, you'll see how they really kind of discovered something we've been working on for 30 years, to be honest, in the lean community. And I'm glad General McChrystal kind of is joining us in that process. So
sure.
Something that's a little different too in special forces, that's different than the rest of the military, but more appropriate to the Toyota approach, is shared leadership. So one of the things that I may be the team commander of the Special Forces A team, but because the missions are very specific, we may have an engineering mission, we may have a medical-based mission, we may have a tactical mission. At a certain point, I hand over the operational leadership to that subject matter expert on my team. And so if we're on an engineering mission, I will lead the overall mission planning and execution. But when I get to the engineering part, I'll turn leadership over to my senior engineering sergeant to lead that mission till we complete the engineering. And I'll just end up hauling bricks or placing charges. I'll just be another member of the team. So that's where we say we abdicate authority within the team, but I can't abdicate my responsibility as a leader for the overall accomplishment of the mission.
Right. So let's go ahead and bring it back to that point then about the similarities. You've covered some of the differences between Green Beret way, traditional military. What now are the connections or the lessons from the Green Beret way into lean leadership or the Toyota way?
Well, it's first off, career-long development of leadership. I mean, one of the things you'll find out, like with Toyota, you'll have Toyota business practice. You'll have, problem solving, or you'll have Hoshin planning that applies all the way down to the team level, whether it's, shop floor management and development. But what you'll see as you grow in scope or in responsibility to group leader, area manager, even president, you're still using those same basic tools, but the scope and the complexity of the problem is different. So you're using the thinking structures, but you're applying it at a different level. Well, we do the same thing. MDMP, at the small team level, we continue to use that. We don't change that process when we get up to, total country global operations. We still approach it with the same methodology, just the scope and the complexity and the level of collaboration changes. The other thing is, special forces and say lean is really should be, if it's not, it certainly is in Toyota, based on small team leadership and collaboration between teams and leadership. So for example, if you're on a shop floor team at Toyota, if you're a team leader, you're collaborating with other team leaders up and down the value stream, for lack of a better term, or you're collaborating with your group leader or with your area manager. And so it becomes more of a matrix organization. So the leadership needs to be small group matrix leadership. And again, structured problem solving and approach to problem solving and planning needs to be the same throughout your career. Just you need to have both pre-promotion development and post-promotion development as a leader, and how that applies in your current role. So So with lean leaders, we need to have, similar to Toyota and similar to the Green Berets, the Green Beret way, is core competencies that every lean leader should have. Number two, role-based competencies and preparation for those role-based competencies, and then mentorship after you're in the role. And then you need to have situational or context-based competencies. So how do I apply my core competencies and my role-based competencies to the situation that I'm facing right now? And to a certain extent, role-playing, scenario-based, even in the operations, find creative ways to expose your leaders to both their best day and their worst day as a leader before they actually have their best day or worst day as a leader. Does that kind of make sense from that perspective?
Yeah. So, to that last point, you're trying to give, I guess you're trying to test people to see how they're going to react in the situation of, okay, here's your worst day. How are you going to be able to handle that and try to develop somebody before they're in that heat of the moment? Toyota, you go to a Toyota plant here in San Antonio, even you'll see an area labeled, training dojo.
Right.
And, I think a lot of that is around manufacturing skills, training, and different types of training, where it seems like, they're very specifically taking people offline and making that investment in people's development. Can you do the same thing in terms of leadership? You talk about role playing, you can practice.
Absolutely. One of the things that we're doing with the Summit on Lean Leadership, we did a little bit of that this last October, and we're going to be doing more of it this June. But to try to set this up as a model for companies to actually do as part of their leadership development, even their team development, is to create scenarios where you have to approach specific problems that a leader has to think through the decision tree, think through the different levels of influence that they need to have. One of the things, if you kind of look back at the whiteboard right quick, that we always talk about as a lean leader, one of the things that you got to kind of look at as a series of concentric circles. And as a leader, you want to influence, okay, what are the core competencies, role-based competencies, and the situational competencies I need to experience? Experiential leadership development, I guess, is what I'm coming down to, to be able to lead and influence inside of my team. And now, if you're a CEO, that's that group of 6, 10, 12 people that you work with and you have to influence and develop and influence to accomplish something. But if you're a team leader or a supervisor, you have to do that within your team. But then you've got the just outside of your team. Maybe that's part of your value stream. How do I need to influence? And what are the things that what are some of the things that some obstacles that I as a leader outside of my team need to take, to eliminate? And I think that's a big case of something that leaders need to do. A role a leader does is actually influence, bringing down the obstacles so their team is successful. But that leader also needs to be able to experience what it is to lead inside of the organization, or even outside of the organization in the community. And the thing that's interesting, the further you get away from that center circle, the less knowledgeable people are about lean methodologies, and so you'll have to influence a higher level of non-lean folks. So, if you're going to do a startup, you're going to have to, work with the mayor, with the utilities, with the community. And so the further you get away from that center circle, the more you're going to have to lead from our lean principles and from our lean values. But you have to do that for folks that may not be aware or maybe even appreciate those lean values and principles.
Right.
And so as we get away from that, the thing about context, developing leaders from an experiential context standpoint, is how can we find creative ways to have leaders have that experience in each one of these circles as part of their leadership development. And so we do that with our Lean Leadership Academy clients, but we're also doing more of that with the summit. We'll be doing more, scenarios that, you'll be able to say, okay, and be very collaborative about it. Okay, leaders, you just experienced this. How should you as a lean leader with lean thinking, lean principles, and lean values approach this differently than a traditional leader or manager would do?
Right. So, and maybe the last point we can cover here in the podcast builds on that. Talking about lean leadership styles and values. People will say on some level, I want to implement lean. We're going to get lean. And they might be thinking about tools, or there might be, I see leaders, this happens in healthcare, executives say, okay, you need to get lean. They're pointing, forgive my pointing, at the employees, and they're not looking in the mirror. They're not necessarily learning lean leadership. So how do you define, in the work you do in different industries or in manufacturing, how do you define the gap between kind of existing leadership, lean leadership? How do you define that gap, and what do you do to try to help make people understand the gap and try to help close the gap?
I wish I could say that there was that much of a gap between the two, but I think you probably experience this as much as I do. First off, the willingness to lead from lean, because I'm ardently my thinking is that lean leadership is in of itself a discipline. And in the same way that military leadership is a discipline, it's very unique. And what makes it unique is we do have fundamental values that we share that are unique to our, both the lean community. We do have expected behaviors. We do have defined thinking structures, PDCA thinking and Pareto thinking, and so since we have defined values that we agree to, that we have fundamental principles that we make decisions through, and we have thinking structures, and we have expected behaviors, that pretty much makes it a discipline. And I think the one thing that lean leaders need to do to really close the gap and as leaders is to really first off define what that is for you. What are our lean values? What are our lean thinking structures? And promote that. One of the things that I'm finding most often with our clients, once we get past the general understanding of okay, I can get my head around. I'm a financial guy, I'm having a tough time getting my head around running my business from a manufacturing operational philosophy. Once we get past that, it really is being able to say, all right, now that you've adopted that, how do you deploy throughout the entire organization a uniform approach to problem solving, to planning, to leading? And if you are going to be a leader, then really plan before you do. Really do. And make sure you check for everything that you do, and then act or adjust accordingly. One of the things I find out most often, both from my lean leaders and general purpose leaders, for lack of a better term, the non-lean leaders, is that they wait too late to give guidance, the right kind of guidance. So, for example, annual planning process is notorious at the end of the year. That you'll say, hey guys, we got to start doing the budget for next year. Here's some of the things I need from you, and you. Forgive my pointing. And then they send everybody off to go do their part of the AOP or the budget. And then they'll come back and then I'll sit down with them and brief them. Well, no, that's not really what I'm looking for. And they'll spend every hour of every day for the next 3 or 4 weeks micromanaging that process. And what they're really doing is, in the check mode, they're finally giving them the guidance that they should have given them in the early stage of the plan mode.
Right.
And what I would like for our lean leaders to do, and our up and coming lean leaders to do, is to do something that we use as part of our planning process in the NDMP process. Is if you looked at the PDCA cycle, we use something called a rule of thirds. And so we look at something when something is due, and we backward plan, and we divide that into thirds. And the rule of thumb is that a leader cannot consume any more than the first 1/3 of that available time to develop, to go and see, practice against your moves. So go and see, develop a tentative plan, and then you must give guidance to your teams as to what are the priorities. You give them a top 5 and say, what are the critical time structures, your timetable requirements, and give them a commander's intent. Tell them, what is my intent for the budget for this next year? And then let your team have the remaining 2/3 of time to go through their PDCA cycle. And so good upfront guidance is critical that leaders do, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I've said, kind of more generally, I've blogged about this before. The ability or the obligation to study and adjust is not an excuse for bad planning.
Yeah.
It's got to be some plan, not just do and then stubbornness. Plan and do and study and adjust. It's such a powerful concept. And so, Sam,
special forces, they'll actually fight you for it. The A team will say, look, here's the first thing we'll do when we get a mission is put a timetable together. And I know that that first 1/3 and even less if possible to get that mission, specified task, implied task, mostly the specified task, things that you must do. And understand my limits, what are the limits and what are my resource limits and so forth, and get that out to the team as soon as possible. And if I consume more than 1/3 of that available time, they will eat your lunch because they're going to do their PDCA cycle. And they want that 2/3 to do their planning. But more importantly, they need to go rehearse it. They need to go mock up. They need to trial from a lean perspective. So you need to allow that available time before you go get on an aircraft or before you put it on the shop floor. And going back to something you said earlier, we need to create that dojo of the mind for a leader as well, where we can go through these scenarios that we do as part of a brief back process where we actually talk through the mission and say, okay, what are the war stoppers along the way? And I think leaders did more of this and really respected their team's time. Make a tremendous difference in their leadership approach.
Yeah. Well, Sam, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up the podcast portion. Maybe we'll stay on live here for a few minutes afterwards. But for people listening to the recorded podcast, our guest again has been Sam MacPherson. Sam, can you tell people if they want to find you online, what are some websites or places they can go to?
Yeah. First off, you can find me on Facebook under the Lean Leadership Academy and the Summit on Lean Leadership, and of course, Sam MacPherson. You can find the Lean Leader Way is my Twitter handle, but I also have the Green Beret Way if you're a little more interested in the lean version of Green Beret version of lean. And of course, look out for www.thesummitonleanleadership.com for this coming June and for everything to do with the Summit on Lean Leadership. And then, of course, if you're interested in help with your transformation, then www.leanleadershipacademy.com. We're pretty selective about who we work with, but if you got the right stuff, maybe you can join the A team. So those are a few ways to get a hold of me, and look forward to hearing from folks if we can help in any way.
All right. Well, thank you. And again, our guest here has been Sam MacPherson, the very first live streamed broadcast episode of the podcast. This, for those of you watching live, I will publish this as episode 235 of my podcast series where I interview leaders and authors and people about lean and in all realms. So you can go to www.leanpodcast.org. If you haven't discovered that podcast, I would invite you to go and check that out. So Sam, been great talking to you today, and I hope you have a great weekend. I guess I feel obligated to say roll tide. Is that how you do it?
Roll tide. Beat Florida.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.